a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and oozy smells, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that meant comfort. While these lines can easily be recognized as the humble beginning of the Hobbit in Unexpected Journey, they also signify something much more significant, the beginning of the modern fantasy genre. Without the innovative works of J.R.R. Tolkien, the modern fantasy genre would not carry the same cultural influence and mainstream success it does today. Works like Terry Brooks's Sword of Shannara, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, and George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire could not have been published without the preceding works of J.R.R. Tolkien. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on January 3, 1892, in Bloemfontein, South Africa. A rather odd spot for a 100% English child, his father moved to South Africa for better prospects in the banking industry. Not much is known about Tolkien's time in South Africa, besides the story in which he is attacked by a large hairy spider, an event that had clear influence on his later writings. Tolkien was forced to move back to England with his mother and brother after his father died in 1896. Yet another turn to the worse happened in 1904 when his mother died of diabetes. He and his brother were forced to live with their aunt Beatrice Sylphide before ending up at Mr. Swocker's boarding school, where he would meet his wife Edith Bratt. By now, Tolkien's interests in linguistic studies were apparent. By the time of his mother's death, he had mastered Latin and Greek and was studying Finnish and Gothic. He continued his studies at Exeter College, diving into more Finnish and Gothic as well as Welsh. He graduated with a second-class degree in honor moderation from Exeter College. While studying, he discovered a poem that caught his interest. Hail, Arundel, brightest of angels, over Middle-earth, sent to men. This couplet's influence can clearly be seen in Lord of the Rings, and had deep influence on many of his writings.
Farewell, Frodo Baggins. I give you the light of Eärendil, our most beloved star.
When World War I started, Tolkien did not rush into battle like many of the men his age, but eventually he was sent to the Western Front. After 4 months in the trenches, he fell ill to trench foot. He was sent to England to recover in the Birmingham hospital. His memories in the war no doubt influenced his later writings. After his recovery, he tried to find an academic profession. He eventually found a job as professor of Anglo-Saxon at the University of Oxford, where he was an extremely influential professor. One day, while grading papers, he came across a blank answer sheet, and for no specific reason, he felt the urge to write the words, "In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit." This marked the beginning of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and the entire modern fantasy genre. Stories with fictitious elements are as old as stories themselves are. The Odyssey and the Iliad both have fictitious elements, and were written hundreds of years before Tolkien's birth. So what is the difference between these ancient fictitious works and the modern fantasy genre that we know so well today? First, the author of a modern fantasy genre story will create a new reality for their story. Instead of taking place a long time ago or in a far-off distant land, the author will create a new world with defined geography and history. Or have their story take place in our world with defined rules and regulations on the fictitious aspects of their stories. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillions include a detailed account of the creation and ordering of Middle-earth, the world in which The Lord of the Rings takes place in. The second difference is that the fictitious elements of the story are designed to be and acknowledged as fictitious. In some ancient literature, the fictitious elements were believed to be true. While these two elements do largely distinguish the two genres, some books had these elements before Tolkien's time. George MacDonald, a Scottish author of the book The Princess and the Goblin, had both these elements in his books that were published long before The Hobbit. So how then can Tolkien be the father of the modern fantasy genre? Maybe a better word to describe Tolkien would be the introducer of the modern fantasy genre. Because while Tolkien's books did include both the standards, he was not the first author to include both standards in his novels. The reason his works are so special are because of the commercial success of them, therefore leading the way for the modern fantasy genre works that are so popular today. Tolkien's legacy is still alive and working. Just this year, the last of the Hobbit trilogy, The Battle of Five Armies, was released. The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were some of the highest grossing films in history, the later of which brought in $2.5 million. The influence of Tolkien touched video games as well. Middle-earth: The Shadow of Mordor, a video game that takes place in Middle-earth, is a relatively new video game that sold millions of copies this fall. Tolkien's legacy even touched board games, with the Lord of the Rings Battle Strategy game, and even the wildly successful Dungeons & Dragons had pieces directly based off of characters from the Lord of the Rings, such as hobbits and ents. However, Tolkien's direct legacy is only part of the equation. The first book of the most successful series ever, the Harry Potter series, has deep plot influence from the Lord of the Rings. A wise wizard guides little people who are inexperienced but excited to learn against an evil person who can only be whole when they find a lost magical object that the protagonist currently has possession of. The indirect legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien goes even further. Every novel in the modern fantasy genre is part of Tolkien's legacy. Because the genre would not be possible without the preceding works of J.R.R. Tolkien, every novel written in this genre is a small part of Tolkien's legacy. Tolkien's legacy is so strong today that in 2000, Amazon.com voted Lord of the Rings as Book of the Millennium. Without the innovative works of J.R.R. Tolkien, the modern fantasy genre could not have been possible, leaving us without many of history's favorite works.